Welcome, deep divers. You know that feeling when you're trying to do something important, like, say, get this deep dive started, and suddenly your brain just goes, hey, remember that weird fact about, I don't know, snail migration? Or you spot a tiny coffee ring on your desk that you have to clean right now.
Or you get up for tea,
Yeah.
right, and then you're tidying, then you're looking at old photos.
Yes. And you never even turn the kettle on.
Yeah.
That whole scattered, easily sidetracked, but maybe weirdly focused on the wrong thing kind of feeling.
Agrees. It's a perfect, if maybe a little chaotic picture of what we're diving into today.
Exactly, because if any of that sounds familiar, even just a tiny bit, you're in the right place. Today, we're digging into attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD.
Yeah, it's really widespread, often misunderstood, and honestly, it presents this kind of fascinating paradox.
It really does. Because our sources, they show ADHD is linked to this incredibly wide range of experiences. Like on one end, you've got people achieving amazing things like Olympic champions.
But then on the other end, it's also connected with some really tough challenges, even things like criminal behavior. So the big question we're tackling is, how? How can one condition show up in such drastically different ways?
What's going on underneath, right?
Exactly. What are the mechanisms that explain this huge spectrum?
It's a really compelling question, and we've pulled together a whole stack of insights to try and connect those dots for you. So let's get into it, starting with a story that's pretty incredible, actually. It really highlights the surprising range of ADHD. Okay, let's rewind a bit. Picture this. It's 1995. We meet Debbie, who happens to be a school principal in the U.S.
Okay.
And she's getting some pretty concerning reports about her son, Michael. Now, you might think, okay, principal's kid, maybe a bit of acting out, typical kid stuff.
Right, you might jump to conclusions.
But Michael's issues, as our sources detail really carefully, they were a lot more complicated than just being a naughty kid.
Yeah, the teacher's complaints were really consistent, like really persistent. Michael was apparently always moving, couldn't stay in his seat, couldn't be still.
Always fidgeting.
Yeah, and concentration. Forget it. Teachers said his mind just seemed to jump from one thing to the next, so classroom lessons, they just weren't sticking.
And behaviorally.
Often disruptive, yeah. Pulling papers off desks, sometimes losing his temper, getting into fights even. They described him as, like, agitated, easily angered, couldn't really control his impulses in that school setting.
And back then, I mean, the reaction might just be, oh, needs discipline, time out, stern talking to, you know, maybe even harsher stuff.
Totally, that knee-jerk reaction.
But our sources really emphasize Michael's difficulties, they weren't just about discipline. It wasn't a kid choosing to misbehave. It was something deeper.
Yeah.
Neurological. It needed understanding, maybe medical help, specialized support.
And eventually, by the time he was 10, things started clicking into place. He got a formal diagnosis. ADHD. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
Which, for any parent, must be scary. Worrying, at least.
Oh, absolutely. You'd immediately start thinking, how is my child going to make it? In a world that demands focus, how can someone who struggles like this achieve anything, build a life? It's a totally understandable fear.
But Debbie, remember, she's a principal. She gets structure. But more than that, she's his mom. She believed in him.
Right.
So instead of just like freezing up at the diagnosis, she went straight into solution mode. And this part of the story is really, really insightful. When a teacher complained, she didn't just nod along.
What'd she do?
She'd turn it back on them, apparently. But supportively, Like, okay, so what are you going to do to help him? What strategies can we try? And remember, she's their boss.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that adds some weight to the question.
Definitely demanded real answers.
Such a proactive stance. And she didn't stop there, right? Like with him disturbing others.
Nope. Instead of just lecturing him, she suggested practical stuff, environmental changes, like just seat him by himself, away from distractions.
Simple, but probably effective.
And for subjects he really struggled with, she didn't just say try harder. She found him a private tutor, one-on-one help.
Tailored support. That makes sense.
And get this reading. He hated traditional reading, so no long novels.
Yeah.
She hunted down short, interesting articles, specifically from the sports pages, about swimming, which he loved.
Finding his hook. Engaging his interest instead of forcing it. That's smart. Really personalized.
So you're picturing this kid, Michael, restless, distracted, maybe wondering, who is this? Some famous Michael?
Yes, a suspense is building.
Okay, fast forward just 8 years. 8 years after that diagnosis, it's 2004, Michael's only 18.
Okay.
He's not just at the Athens Olympic. He's dominating, swimming.
Dominate, like multiple medals.
Oh, yeah, not just one or two. This kid, the one labeled unfocused, disruptive, he wins 8 medals in Athens. 6 gold.
8 medals, 6 gold at 18.
And by the time he retired in 2016, he had, wait for it, 23 gold medals out of 28 total Olympic medals. Most decorated Olympian.
Sure.
Held world records for years after retiring. Some just broken recently, like 2024.
No way. Are you serious?
You guessed it. That kid, Michael, is Michael Phelps.
Michael Phelps had ADHD. The swimmer.
The legend himself. Think about that. A kid diagnosed with attention deficit becomes maybe the most focused, disciplined athlete in history. It just turns everything upside down, right? Our whole idea of what ADHD means, what potential looks like.
That's mind-blowing. And he's not entirely alone, is he? You find other examples.
Exactly. Our sources point to others. Like Simone Biles. Gymnastics demands incredible focus.
Unbelievable focus and control.
Or Richard Branson, the entrepreneur, Virgin Group founder, known for being innovative, maybe a bit impulsive in business, also has ADHD.
Wow, so these aren't just flukes. There's a pattern of high achievement possible.
Which leads people to ask, wait, is ADHD like a secret genius disease? Because, you know, I lose my keys sometimes. Maybe I'm a genius.
Slight chuckle. Yeah, that's a really common take. Kind of the Hollywood version, maybe. And while, yes, you absolutely find brilliant, successful people with ADHD...
Doesn't mean everyone with it is a genius.
Definitely not. And it's really crucial to remember, when we say ADHD shows up in all fields of life, we don't just mean the shiny, successful ones.
You mean it includes the negative stuff, too?
We mean all fields, including, yeah, unfortunately, some really difficult societal problems.
Like, you're saying criminal behavior? But wouldn't someone with hyperactivity, all that energy, wouldn't they be, like, super obvious, caught instantly? Seems contradictory.
You'd think so, but unfortunately, no. Our sources bring up this really disturbing case from 2006. A murder. A teenage girl killed by 2 young men.
Oh, I think I remember hearing about something like that. The ones obsessed with that horror movie?
Exactly. Scream. They tried to copy the movie in real life, became known as the Scream Killers.
Horrifying. And what's the ADHD connection?
Well, one of the killers, his lawyer, actually used ADHD as a major part of the defense.
Really?
The argument was basically that his ADHD was the root cause, that his brain was, quote, pathologically messed up. And because of that, he wasn't fully responsible for what he did.
Wow. Like, blame the brain, not the person.
Essentially, yes. That was the core of that defense strategy.
And that wasn't just a one-off thing.
No, and that's important. The sources point out there are multiple documented cases. Defense lawyers using an ADHD diagnosis successfully to argue for lighter sentences, getting punishments reduced.
So how we understand ADHD, or maybe misunderstand it, has real legal consequences.
Huge consequences.
Yeah.
In courts, in society.
Which brings us right back to that central puzzle. How does one condition lead to Michael Phelps and situations like the Scream Killers? Olympic gold and criminal acts. It's such a huge range.
What is the core thing going on?
Right. What's the mechanism? And the answer, it seems to take us deep inside the brain itself.
It really does. And what's fascinating is that ADHD is linked to actual organic differences in the brain. It's complex, involves multiple areas, but one region keeps popping up as really significant.
Okay, which one?
It's a small but critical part, kind of mid-right side of the brain. It's called the Orbitofrontal Cortex, the OFC.
The OFC, is that widely accepted science or still kind of theoretical? It sounds super specific.
No, it's very well supported. Solid consensus. Researchers see it consistently.
How do they know?
Well, a few ways. Clinically, patients who get an injury or maybe a tumor right in that OFC area, they often show symptoms that look remarkably like ADHD. Impulse control issues, attention problems, trouble managing emotions.
Huh. So damage there mimics ADHD.
Exactly. And then there's direct evidence, too. A study, I think, from the University of Alberta looked at brain electrical activity in teenagers, some with ADHD, some without. When they were just resting, brain activity looked pretty similar in both groups. But, and this is the key part, when they had to do something requiring focus, like reading.
Yeah.
The brain activity in the kids with ADHD actually went down. It decreased.
Wait, decreased? When they needed to focus.
Yeah.
That makes no sense. It's like turning the volume down when you need to hear something.
I know, it's totally counterintuitive. It's the exact opposite of what happens in non-ADHD brains, where activity ramps up for focus tasks.
That's wild. So their brains kind of check out when concentration is needed.
In a way, yeah. And backing this up, MRI scans often show that the right frontal lobe where the OFC sits, it's frequently smaller, measurably smaller in people with ADHD compared to neurotypical folks.
Okay, so this one little area the OFC, potentially smaller, maybe not working the same way,
Mhm.
is responsible for all this. The chaos, the focus issues, the impulses, that's a lot for one brain part.
You really can't overestimate its influence. The OFC's main job, essentially, is to be the brain's primary filter.
A filter, like for water.
Kind of. But for information, think of it like a really sophisticated sieve. It's constantly sorting through this massive flood of stuff, internal things like emotions, urges, thoughts, and external stuff bombarding your senses. Its job is to stop you from being totally overloaded, to prioritize, to decide what gets through to your conscious awareness.
Okay, let me try an analogy. You know that saying, if you want to confuse him, give him choices. Is it like that? Too many options, too much info hitting the brain with a weak filter?
That's actually a really good way to think about it. For someone with ADHD, their brain is just constantly slammed with this torrent, this flood of thoughts, ideas, feelings, impulses, sensory details.
All at once.
All at once.
Yep.
And without that effective filtering or prioritizing from the OFC, now attention itself, it's limited, right? You can't truly focus on 500 things simultaneously.
Right.
So the person with ADHD doesn't necessarily have less capacity for attention. Their attention might be totally normal in terms of raw ability, but it's completely overwhelmed. It's drowned out by the sheer volume and chaos of everything pouring in unfiltered.
So they're trying to do homework, but also hearing the TV, remembering they need socks, feeling an itchy tag, thinking about dinner.
All of it, yeah. It's not a lack of attention. It's attention struggling to cope with an uncontrollable flood.
So it's not an attention deficit. It's more like an attention overflow.
Yeah.
They're paying attention to everything, or whatever screams loudest in the moment. That changes everything for me. Makes so much more sense.
Exactly. And that overflow is why the main symptom looks like a deficit. Because when that filter, the OFC, the cat of attention, you could say, is overwhelmed or away,
Then the mic will play.
the mice, yeah. All those unfiltered impulses from lower brain areas just run wild. That explains why people with ADHD might interrupt a lot, find it hard to wait their turn, blurt things out.
Because the idea or impulse hits,
Yeah.
and there's nothing stopping it from coming right out.
Right. There's this urgency to act on it immediately. It can definitely feel disruptive, both for them and people around them.
And in those really extreme, tragic cases, like the screen killers, you're saying this lack of filtering, this inability to hit the brakes on harmful thoughts or urges, that's the mechanism.
It plays a huge role, yes. The impaired OFC makes it much harder to exert self-control, to inhibit actions that could be harmful. It's also why you see impulsive behaviors in other areas, like, say, shopping.
Oh, yeah.
Our sources have this funny description. Someone with ADHD, if they have the money, might literally buy out half a store on impulse. Not because they need it, just boom, act on the urge. The filter isn't strong enough to say, wait, consequences.
Wow. Okay. So that's the AD part, attention deficit, often overflow. Now, the HD hyperactivity disorder, not high definition.
Right, not high def.
When I hear hyperactivity, I picture the kid bouncing off the walls, shaking legs, can't sit still. But you're saying it's not always like that.
Correct. That classic physical restlessness is definitely a major symptom for many, but it's not universal, and it doesn't always look like that.
How else can it show up?
It can be more internal, like a constant mental buzz, a mind that won't shut off, even if the body looks calm. Or it can be subtler physical things, constant nail biting, tapping fingers, even talking really fast, like the words are just tumbling out.
So it's still this excess energy needing an outlet, just not always obvious running around.
Exactly. It's all indicating that underlying restlessness.
Okay, but here's another one of those paradoxes our sources mentioned. Lots of people with ADHD are described as having poor motor coordination. Clumsy, dropping things, bumping into stuff.
That's often noted.
But then, Simone Biles, Olympic gymnast, ADHD, her entire career is about superhuman coordination and control. How does that work? Seems like a flat-out contradiction.
That's exactly what they call the exception that proves the rule. Well, yeah, there might be a general tendency towards poorer coordination for many.
Some develop incredible skills.
Exactly. Through maybe intense training, sheer determination, maybe unique brain compensation. Some individuals develop truly exceptional motor abilities. It just shows the huge range of how this condition presents. And speaking of seeming contradictions, that term attention deficit doesn't just mean no attention.
What else can it mean?
It can also mean hyperfocus.
Hyperfocus.
Yeah.
Like too much focus. How is that part of an attention deficit disorder? That sounds like the opposite.
I know, right? It's another one of those fascinating twists tied to the OFC's wiring. Hyperfocus is when someone gets locked into the state of intense, prolonged concentration on one single thing.
To the exclusion of everything else.
Totally. Like, someone with ADHD might get so absorbed in a video game or maybe a project they're passionate about that hours just vanish. They forget to eat, drink, don't hear people calling them. Complete tunnel vision.
And this links to time.
Directly linked to what doctors call time illiteracy, a really poor sense of estimating time.
Oh, man, I know someone like that. I say, let's meet at 9 p.m. He shows up at 11 a.m. the next day. And he's genuinely confused why I'm mad. Like, what? It's only 2 hours past the next day starting.
Laughs slightly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That kind of thing. So these seemingly opposite symptoms, intense focus versus scattered attention, poor coordination versus elite athleticism, time blindness alongside hyperfocus.
They all trace back to how the OFC is working. Or maybe not working typically.
Precisely. They're all natural, though complex results of that core difference in brain processing tied to the orbitofrontal cortex.
Man, that OFC, it's doing way more than just filtering impulses. It sounds like it's fundamental to how we even interact with the world. We got to protect our OFCs.
We really do. It's connected to so many other vital brain functions, like it has strong links to short-term memory and complex ties to how our brain processes visual information. So practically speaking, this means people with ADHD often have significant working memory issues holding information in mind, you know?
Like remembering a phone number someone just told you.
Exactly. Or following multi-step directions. If you give someone with ADHD detailed street directions, they might forget the turns really quickly. Or even if they remember the steps, they might struggle to put them together into a mental map they can actually follow.
That sounds incredibly frustrating for everyone involved.
It definitely can be, but maybe the most critical role of the OFC beyond just thinking tasks is how it helps us interpret all the nonverbal stuff in communication.
Like body language, tone of voice.
Exactly. Eye contact, subtle shifts. And it's not just reading them in the moment. The OFC is also key for storing what are called emotional imprints from our past experiences.
Emotional imprints.
Yeah.
Like subconscious feeling memories.
That's a great way to put it. Unconscious, stored emotional associations. And this part is really fascinating if you're interested in things like emotional intelligence or how trauma works. It shows how deeply our past shapes our present reactions, often without us realizing it.
Wow. So this sophisticated subconscious feeling database.
Yeah, and the OFC's role in processing these cues and storing these imprints. It explains why individuals with ADHD often have a really hard time reading subtle social signals. Navigating relationships can be tricky.
Give me an example.
Okay, imagine your friend with ADHD is over at your place. It's late, you're yawning, maybe your mom's hinting about bedtime. You might even say, wow, it's past 2 a.m.
Right, dropping hints.
But your friend might just keep talking, totally oblivious. Their OFC might not be picking up those subtle, nonverbal, time-to-go cues. Or maybe the internal flood of other thoughts is just drowning out those social signals.
So they're not being rude on purpose. They're genuinely missing it.
Often, yes. They're missing the unspoken language of social interaction because that part of the brain isn't processing it effectively.
Okay, so that paints a really clear picture of the brain side of things. Why Michael Phelps might have been that restless kid. But, as you said, he had this incredibly supportive mom who got it and found solutions.
Right, a crucial factor.
But for many others with ADHD, they face rejection, misunderstanding, maybe because of these very social difficulties, these brain differences, and the environments they're in.
You've hit on the exact bridge to our next big question. We've seen ADHD linked to this organic brain difference, the OFC, but we've also seen this huge salad of human experiences, as you called it, Phelps to serious crime.
Yeah, if it's a brain thing, why isn't everyone the same?
Precisely. Where does this OFC difference actually come from? Is it purely genetic, something you're just born with? Or is it more about your environment shaping that brain development?
The classic nature versus nurture debate. Makes my brain hurt just thinking about it. Need a snack break?
Smiling, hold that thought. Because our sources, especially insights from Dr. Gabor Mate, point really strongly towards ADHD being one of those conditions where the secret, both the origin and the solution, lies deep in early childhood, specifically the environment during those critical developmental windows.
Okay, so back to the very beginning. Like birth.
Right back there. When you compare human babies to other animals, even other primates, our brains at birth are surprisingly underdeveloped. We're the least developed in brain terms.
Really? Less developed than, like, a monkey?
Way less developed at the starting line. Our brains need years of growth outside the womb. We basically can't finish cooking inside. We have to come out and interact with the world for our minds to really blossom.
I'm like a horse.
Exactly. Think of a foal. Within hours, it's standing, walking, running. Our sources joke about it. The mom horse is still recovering, and the foal's already, like, showered, paid the bill, and is out negotiating stable fees.
Laughs. Okay, yeah. While human babies, we're blobs for months, years to walk, talk, figure things out. Super dependent.
But what's amazing about us humans is the massive brain growth after birth. That remontada, that comeback. It keeps growing almost as fast as it did in the womb.
How fast?
By age 4, the human brain triples in size from birth. By adulthood, it quadruples. Compare that to a chimpanzee, its brain only doubles in size after birth.
Whoa. So most of our complex brain wiring happens after we're born out in the world.
The vast majority, yes. Interacting directly with their early environment. That's when the really intricate sculpting happens.
And during that intense growth spurt, it's like a competition inside the brain. Cells and connections fighting for survival.
Kind of, yeah. Researchers talk about it like that. It's like biological natural selection in there. The brain is constantly assessing, okay, are these connections useful? Am I learning to move, see, focus? If not, halt. Weaken those pathways.
So the brain is actively pruning itself based on experience. Strengthening what's used, letting go of what isn't.
Exactly. The connections that get used that are vital for adapting and surviving, they get stronger, more efficient. The ones that aren't stimulated, they weaken, maybe even disappear. Same goes for brain chemicals, neurotransmitters. Use them or lose them, essentially.
So for our genes, our basic blueprint to actually build a healthy brain and avoid issues like ADHD.
You need the right environmental conditions, especially during that supercritical, superplastic phase.
Yeah.
Early childhood.
So it's not just the genes, it's the world they meet. You got to search for childhood, like the saying goes, that's where the action is.
That's where so much is laid down. And you're probably thinking, okay, what are these right conditions?
Yeah, what does the developing brain need?
Our sources boil it down to 3 main things. 1, good nutrition. 2, a safe physical environment, free from constant danger.
Okay, those seem pretty basic, hopefully manageable for most.
Generally, yes, outside of extreme situations. But the third one, this is often the tricky part. It's having a consistent, attuned caregiver, someone providing constant emotional and physical care. Usually, historically, that's the biological mother, but not always.
Attuned. What does that mean exactly, and why is that third one often the issue?
Well, a lot of developmental challenges, including ADHD, seem to stem from problems with that third pillar, especially in the first 9 months after birth. Anthropologist Ashley Montague called this period the external womb.
External womb. Like development continues outside.
Yeah. And during this time, direct physical contact, touch, warmth, being held, breastfeeding, co-sleeping, it's not just nice, it's neurologically essential.
So it's the whole environment, the physical closeness, but also the caregiver's emotional state. That directly shapes the baby's brain.
Directly. Massively. Dr. Gabor Mate, who's written extensively on this, argues in his book Scattered Minds that the primary caregiver's brain, especially the mother's in that early phase, literally programs the child's developing brain.
Programs it how?
Because the infant initially understands the whole world only through their relationship with that caregiver. That bond becomes the template. It shapes how they'll interact with everything and everyone else for their entire life. It's foundational.
Wow. The caregiver as the original programmer, laying down the emotional operating system.
It's profound. Look at these developmental steps. By day 6, just 6 days old, a baby can smell its mother, distinguish her scent. That triggers neural networks for bonding.
6 days. Amazing.
Between 2 days and 7 weeks, their vision locks onto the mother's face almost exclusively. Ignores others, usually even the father, unless he's the main caregiver, which underscores a key point from our source. Motherhood is a role, not just biology.
Right, the primary caregiver fulfills that role. Good distinction.
Then after 7 weeks, still focused on the caregiver's face. But after 17 weeks, something shifts. They start focusing specifically on the caregiver's eyes.
The eyes. Why?
Because through their own developing OFC, that brain region again, they start trying to read the caregiver's emotions. Are they happy? Sad? Stressed? Calm? They're learning the emotional landscape of their world by looking into those eyes.
So the OFC is learning to decode feelings by staring into mom's eyes. That's incredible, almost poetic.
And there's even subtler stuff. An article in Scientific American mentioned how women's pupils tend to dilate slightly when they see a baby. And babies, they smile more, respond better to faces with wider pupils.
Unconscious signals.
Totally unconscious. It's like this hidden neurological language. The baby is picking up on the caregiver's underlying emotional state, their body language, even stuff the caregiver isn't consciously aware of. It bypasses words. Direct emotional connection.
So the caregiver's right brain, controlling their nonverbals, is kind of programming the baby's right brain, the OFC, emotionally, like a direct download.
That's a perfect way to describe it. The mother's right brain programs the child's right brain emotionally. The baby's brain becomes incredibly sensitive to and shaped by the caregiver's inner world. They can even sense when emotions are being hidden or faked.
Faked? How do we know that?
There was this famous study, the double TV experiment at USC. First, babies interacted directly with their moms. Happy, normal interaction. Then the moms went behind a screen and interacted via a recorded video feed.
Okay.
Now, the video showed the moms smiling, affectionate, looking engaged. But the babies, they got distressed, agitated, upset.
But why? They were seeing their smiling mom.
Gabor Mate explains it with his idea of attunement. Babies have this deep, innate need to feel their caregiver is feeling them. Right now. In real time. There needs to be this constant shared emotional synchrony, harmony.
And a recording can't do that.
Exactly. No matter how loving the recording looks, it lacks that immediate, responsive feedback. The smile in the video isn't reacting to this gurgle, this frown from the baby right now. There's a tiny but critical disconnect, a lag.
And the baby senses that lack of real-time connection.
They sense it deeply. They feel the caregiver isn't truly with them, not responding authentically in the moment. And that lack of genuine reciprocal attunement, it's profoundly unsettling for an infant.
Wow. So babies who can't even talk are already like tiny lie detectors. Sensing emotional inconsistency makes you realize how incredibly vulnerable they are.
Absolutely critical point. Any major flaw, any chronic inconsistency in that sensitive emotional environment for this incredibly perceptive little being, it can cause real problems in brain development because their deepest need is security, consistency. When that's shaky, they feel fear, anxiety, and that directly impacts the wiring process.
So if there's a chronic lack of this attunement, this feeling felt, that leads to deficits in brain chemicals, like dopamine in the OFC, needed for building connections.
Precisely. Without that consistent, attuned emotional back and forth, the infant brain doesn't get the steady stimulation it needs to properly develop its neurochemical systems, its pathways, especially in areas like the OFC, crucial for attention and emotional regulation.
Which is why Mate argues ADHD isn't just an individual thing.
It's fundamentally a family disorder, rooted, he believes, in that lack of attunement, that missing emotional consistency in the primary relationship. You have to look at the whole family system, its emotional climate, not just the person with the diagnosis.
And the stats seem to back that up. Higher divorce rates, links to parental addiction.
Yeah, Russell Barkley found divorce rates 3 times higher in parents of ADHD kids. And stats show 25% of people with ADHD had a parent with alcohol addiction.
So Mate's saying it's not just that family problems make ADHD worse, but that chronic tension between the parents can actually cause it. That sounds like a vicious cycle.
He argues it often is. A child grows up in a tense environment, doesn't get attuned care, develops ADHD symptoms. Those symptoms then add more stress to the family, potentially worsening the parental conflict, maybe leading to separation.
Which then makes things even harder for the child.
Exactly. It becomes this self-perpetuating loop. Parental discord, lack of attunement, impaired brain development, more family stress, potential breakdown feeding back into the child's issues. It can ripple through generations.
Generations. So parents of kids with ADHD might have had similar issues with their own parents.
Yeah.
Distant, inconsistent relationships.
Often, yes. Which helps explain why things like ADHD and addiction can seem more common in communities facing chronic stress, like oppressed minorities. It looks inherited, but maybe not just through genes, but through these passed down environmental and relational patterns.
Okay, powerful idea.
Yeah.
But the obvious question, not every kid in a troubled family gets ADHD, right? The stats you mentioned, 2.5% of adults, 5% of kids globally. Why them and not others in the same boat?
Right. Excellent point. This is where genetics does come back into play, but in a specific way. It seems individuals who develop ADHD often have a higher baseline sensitivity.
Sensitivity.
Yeah, a kind of inherent, possibly genetic predisposition that makes them more neurologically vulnerable to those environmental stresses compared to others in the exact same situation.
So it's the combination, the difficult environment plus a heightened sensitivity to that environment. It takes both.
That's Mate's view, exactly. This heightened sensitivity makes them more susceptible to environmental illnesses, even things like medication side effects. It affects their internal state, too, like a small drop in blood sugar from missing a meal. For someone with ADHD whose emotional regulation is already shaky due to the OFC, that might trigger a huge reaction, like a rage attack.
But wait, paradoxically, could that same sensitivity, that intense awareness, also be linked to creativity, seeing connections others miss, being good problem solvers?
Absolutely. It's often a dual-edged sword. That heightened awareness can fuel incredible creativity and innovation.
Okay, so it's summing up Mate's idea. ADHD isn't just environment, isn't just genes, it's the interaction. You need specific environmental conditions hitting someone with an often genetic, heightened sensitivity to those conditions.
That's the core concept. What's inherited might not be ADHD itself, but the sensitivity and often the family circumstances, the lack of attunement that let ADHD develop.
And you said earlier, this is actually good news. Why?
Because if it's about that interaction, that's something we can influence. You can't change your genes, right? But you can change the environment. You can work on how that environment interacts with your predispositions. That opens up real hope for change, for intervention, for healing.
Even for adults, if the damage, so to speak, was done decades ago.
Even for adults, which leads us right into how we move forward.
Okay, so if there's hope, even later in life, how does that actually work? You mentioned Dr. Marion Diamond's work showing brains can change even when old.
Neuroplasticity, right?
Exactly, neuroplasticity. The brain's amazing ability to rewire itself, form new connections, adapt. It's most dramatic in babies. Like, a baby's brain can sometimes fully compensate if it loses half its structure.
Wow. Now, that flexibility definitely decreases with age. It's easier for a kid's brain to change than an adult's. But, and this is crucial, it never completely disappears.
So the window isn't totally closed?
Never totally closed. We can't change the genes, but we can change the environment, influencing them. We can even change the brain's structure and function through new experiences, new learning, new ways of relating. So yeah, stimulating that delayed development in ADHD, it's challenging, no doubt, but it is absolutely possible at any age.
That's incredibly hopeful.
Yeah.
So how do you start? If you're an adult, you can't just get a do-over on childhood attunement. Where's the starting point?
The foundation is recognizing that core issue, that deficit in the primary relationship, that lack of feeling truly seen and felt. So the solution, whether for a kid later on or an adult, starts with consciously strengthening that emotional bond, both with important people in your life and, crucially, with yourself.
Strengthening the bond with yourself.
It connects to Carl Rogers' idea of unconditional positive regard. Deep down, the person needs to grasp. Okay, my actions might be problematic sometimes, things I do might be unacceptable. But me, my core self, I'm still okay. I'm still worthy of love and acceptance no matter what.
Separating the behavior from the person. We don't like what you did, but we still love you. That distinction feels really important.
It's critical, and that's why old school punishments like time out, isolating the child, they're particularly damaging for kids with ADHD.
Why specifically them?
Because for them, connection is everything. Isolation feels like a direct threat to that vital bond with their caregiver. It taps right into their deepest fear of abandonment. That triggers so much anxiety, they can't possibly reflect calmly or learn anything. It just reinforces the pain.
Okay, so less punishment, but what about rewards? Is just switching to incentives any better? Like less stick, more carrot?
From this perspective, maybe not as much difference as you'd think. Both punishment and reward systems tend to train the person to respond to external cues. Do this to avoid pain, do that to get a prize.
Instead of building internal motivation.
Exactly. It doesn't foster self-awareness or self-regulation from the inside out. And for people with ADHD who often already struggle with feeling okay about themselves, relying on external validation can make them into extreme people pleasers, always looking outside for approval because they don't have that solid sense of inner worth.
So what they really need isn't more control, external or internal, but genuine connection, unconditional acceptance.
That's the core need, yes. Real, authentic, unforced connection.
Okay, so practically, for parents dealing with a sensitive kid with ADHD where every interaction feels high stakes, what does Gabor Mate suggest? It sounds like walking on eggshells.
He offers some really practical advice. First, let kids make age-appropriate choices and experience the natural consequences. Don't always jump in and rescue them,
Wait,
like
so
if they refuse to do homework. Instead of battling every night, let them face the consequences at school from the teacher. Helps them learn cause and effect for themselves.
okay, that makes sense. What else?
Second, if there is conflict, the parent should always be the one to initiate making up. Don't leave the child stewing, feeling rejected or abandoned. Reaching out first reinforces that the bond is secure, even after arguments.
So repairing the connection is the priority.
Always. And third, parents need to try and understand the why behind the behavior. Why did this happen? Not just react to the surface action.
Mm.
And importantly, acknowledge their own part in the dynamic, even if unintentional.
That takes a lot of self-awareness from the parent.
Huge amount. Because remember, ADHD is seen as a family disorder. So the solution has to be family-wide. Everyone involved, parents, teachers, anyone in authority needs to shift towards understanding and support. Recognizing that challenging behavior isn't usually defiance, it's a symptom, it's pain. They need empathy, not just rules.
But what if that ship has sailed? What if you're an adult now and childhood was what it was? Is there still hope? Can you kind of reparent yourself?
Absolutely. Neuroplasticity doesn't stop, even if you're 60, 70, 80. Change is still possible. But for adults, the responsibility shifts. It's now on the individual to actively change their own emotional environment and, crucially, to improve their relationship with themselves.
Through self-understanding,
Yeah.
self-acceptance.
It's a journey. Understanding the condition, accepting how it affects you, and then developing self-compassion. Mattei really stresses compassion for self, which is hard because
Adults with ADHD often have really low self-esteem, even if they look successful on the outside. That sounds incredibly painful.
it's very common, sadly. Rock-bottom self-worth despite achievements. They've internalized feeling not good enough for years. And that pain, Mattei points out, is a huge driver behind the high rates of addiction in people with ADHD.
Addiction as a way to cope.
Exactly. Using substances, alcohol, nicotine, drugs, or behaviors like gambling, workaholism, it's often an attempt to numb that constant internal noise, the overwhelming feelings, the shame, the conflict. A way to get temporary relief from an unbearable inner state. Self-medication, really.
So the first step towards healing that is talking about it, expressing the pain to someone who won't judge.
That's a critical first step. Breaking the silence. Mattei noticed almost all his adult ADHD patients had this deep difficulty expressing emotions healthily. Often, they don't even have clear memories of why they feel negatively about their past or family.
How can that be?
Because emotional memories, the feelings associated with events, are stored differently, often earlier, processed by the OFC. Those negative imprints stick around, even if the explicit, factual details fade.
And that explains things like a fear of authority figures, bosses, teachers.
Very common, yes. And it can also lead to this really confusing push-pull in relationships. Intense fear of being abandoned, but also a real difficulty with true intimacy. A fear of getting too close.
How does that work?
Remember the OFC storing emotional imprints and reading cues. For an adult with ADHD, even a tiny negative signal from a partner, a frown, a tone of voice, a slightly delayed text can unconsciously trigger those old abandonment fears. It feels like a huge threat, even if logically it isn't, because it taps into deep, unresolved childhood pain. The reaction can seem way out of proportion.
And then, maybe the next day, they act like nothing happened, which must drive their partners crazy.
Exactly. Emotional processing can be very uneven. Add to that the everyday challenges: forgetfulness, disorganization, starting sentences but not finishing, getting distracted mid-conversation. It's a lot. Understanding all this is key. Whether it's you or someone you care about, it builds empathy.
Okay, I feel like I've got the FK ADHD, full knowledge about ADHD. Now I need the SADHD solutions. For an adult, how do they get better without a time machine?
Smiling.
Right.
For adults, the power lies in taking responsibility for their own growth, understanding themselves, accepting themselves, and then proactively working with themselves with compassion. Mattei calls it compassion for self. It's often slow work, especially after years of trying to please others or feeling ashamed. You can't rush it.
But are there concrete things adults can do, practical strategies to start creating that better environment for their brain?
Yes, definitely. Several things. First, organize the external world. Structure your environment. Make it predictable, less cluttered. That reduces the load on working memory and filtering.
Makes sense. Tidy space, tidy mind, kinda.
Sort of, yeah. Second, regulate the internal environment. Consistent meals, especially managing blood sugar. Stable sleep schedule, considering medication with a doctor. Nutrition's huge because of that blood sugar sensitivity. Low sugar can cause brain fog and irritability. High sugar can ramp up hyperactivity.
Okay, diet, sleep, maybe meds. What else?
Physical activity, really important. Stretching too, actually. ADHD can sometimes cause chronic muscle tension. Movement helps release that. Also, practices like mindfulness or meditation. They're basically attention training, building those OFC skills.
Training the focus muscle.
Exactly. And maintaining a structured daily routine provides external support for internal disorganization. Interestingly, many find they work best late at night, fewer distractions when the world is quiet.
Okay, those self-help things sound really useful, empowering, but are they usually enough? Or is professional help, like therapy, often needed too?
They are incredibly valuable, but yeah, often they're not a complete substitute for professional help, especially for digging into those deeper emotional patterns and relationship issues. Consulting a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist is almost always recommended. And hey, remember, I'm just the messenger here at a postman bringing insights from the specialists.
Got it. Postman acknowledged. What about medications like Ritalin, Adderall? Why not just rely on those if it's a brain difference?
Medication can be incredibly helpful for many. They work on brain chemistry, boosting things like dopamine, which can improve OFC function and reduce core symptoms quite dramatically. Big quality of life improvement for some, but results vary. There can be side effects,
Right.
and fundamentally, medication addresses the biological side. It's a powerful tool, but it's usually not the whole answer. It works best as part of a broader approach.
So we land back at that interaction. Environment and sensitivity. The path forward involves conscious choices on different levels.
That's it exactly. There's the medical choice, consider meds to help the brain biology. And there's the psychological and social choice, actively change your environment, inner and outer, to reduce negativity, manage impulses, build connection.
And for the adult with ADHD, that means taking ownership.
Taking ownership of that journey.
Yeah.
Self-awareness, self-acceptance, it's often hard, means facing uncomfortable stuff, digging within. Takes real courage to ask for help from loved ones or professionals, and learning to handle setbacks because change isn't linear.
And for the parents, the bosses, the teachers, what's their big responsibility?
Their responsibility is huge. It's about choosing empathy over control. Enduring their own discomfort sometimes to prioritize the child's or person's healthy development over just stopping a difficult behavior right now. Seeking to understand, recognizing behavior as communication, often of pain, and remembering the potential like Phelps that can flourish with the right support, consistent, attuned help.
And even if ADHD isn't directly touching your life, understanding all this, it helps everyone, right? These ideas about brain change, environment, connection, self-acceptance, they apply broadly.
Absolutely. It fosters empathy, patience, better understanding across the board. It makes us all a bit more aware of the complex dance between our biology and our experiences.
In the end, ADHD really shows us that incredible link, doesn't it, between our nature and our nurture, how our brains are shaped by the world from day one.
It's a powerful testament to that dynamic interaction. And it shows that while we can't rewrite our genes, we always have some power to shape our environment and through that influence our brains, our lives. The journey of understanding, of self-compassion, of connection, it's lifelong and it offers real hope for transformation at any age.
Wow. That was definitely a deep dive. Brains, behavior, babies, bonds. It really makes you think differently about focus, about support, about how we're all wired. And speaking of wired differently, I think my brain is now telling me it's time to alphabetize my spice rack.
Yeah.
Let's see how long that focus lasts. Thanks for diving deep with us today.